What do you think that you know? What do you know? And what do you think that you know? What do you know and what do you think that you know? What are you working on? Why are you working on it? Okay, so I've been going a little bit nutty, right? A little bit lately. Why? Well, you can only imagine. A, I'm nuts. It's just a given, brute fact. So I'm just kind of sitting in my own stew. Another one is I'm working on contradictions, dialetheism, the paraconsistency of logic, right? But I'm trying to do it through geometry and thoughts on geometry and stellation, and a big argument against and then well, before I go into the argument, and so dialetheism, right, working with contradictions, and normally the contention is that you can remain and should remain agnostic to a contradiction because it will eventually yield one way or the other, right? It'll eventually fetter itself out as and index itself as not a contradiction. But so there was that, right? But then I also wanted to make metaphor to the concept that logicians have put forward called logical explosion, right? Meaning that if something equals it's not itself, right? Then there's logical explosion, and by that they mean that I suppose what they mean is that any other variable can fit in, x. If x equals not x, then x can equal anything. And if any can equal anything, then there's an explosion, right? And so I was thinking of metaphors for explosion, logical explosion, being like a planet or some other object that is here at this time and then not here at this time. But then the dividing line is the time. It's the indexing itself. And then realizing that the problems with contradiction are often found in how it is we become convicted of static ideas like Platonic forms, right, that move through time. I mean, even are signified, our mental image of a Platonic form, right, being different than letters going, like fonts going before your mind, right? Different than just hearing words and no fonts or no geometry goes before your mind, right? But thinking that the signified of a geometry, how to put it, has a static, reiterative form to itself, such that you could be certain later on, like 5 years down the line, when you think you're thinking of the same concept, that in fact you are thinking of the same concept, meaning that the same signified came to mind. Like I might think of a perfect pyramid in my head, or the idea of a perfect pyramid. I might even imagine it. The lines might be really, really discrete and not like the triangle that lays over a ball, right? Then it rotates and you see that the 3 points of the triangle are really, like, from that point of that orthography there, it's a triangle, and as you rotate it, it's not like that, right? It'd be more like, 5 years ago I used to think of the edges of my pyramid, the outlines, the lines that define the edge of the geometry, as golden, and now I think of them as thinner, maybe more whiter lines with a blue background, something like that, right? Like personalizing your signifieds, like, hey, I know what a pyramid is, right? I know different types of pyramids, so the base can be different. Anyway, the whole point though is I'm working on this book on metaphors and contradictions and so forth, right? And then and dialetheism, right? And then trying now to figure out where math is in its theories of boundedness when it comes to spherical, bounded balls and unbounded balls, or something to that effect. Okay, anyway, but the point is I realized that this other problem that I've been trying to interpret as a way to link generative grammar to kind of an engineering overlay. Like, I think I kind of reverse engineered some of my own thoughts on something, right? Anyway, and so let me get that lewd boober painting off the wall. Or not, because this was going to be an object lesson and in bad underwear. Let me cover up the nipples. See, the way in which the brush stroke is this way in this painting, right? If you get close enough, the brush strokes in this painting, right, were painted left to right. And so when I hang it this way, the left to rightness of the West's convention to read can figure out why the strokes look more dissonant and problematic, less smooth than the current movement of the brush stroke, right? So directionality in time is a huge factor, right, in terms of creating metaphor. Anyway, so I think I figured out what I was doing, right? I think I figured out what I was doing. Like, I kind of remembered me trying to do something. Anyway, and so originally it started out as a logic problem for contradictions, right? A and not A, right? A Venn diagram where the left sphere or ball is the positive, and the other Venn diagram is its negation. Not necessarily its absence, but it could include its absence, right? And trying to talk about the intersectionality, not the intersection, I mean, sorry, not intersectionality, that's too politically charged now anyway. The intersection between where a thing and its negation might intersect, yielding the contradiction, right? And then it came down to glutes and gaps, in dialetheism. Like in dialetheism, maybe the top part, only the top, after you run another tangent within the frame of the Venn diagram, you put an X through the Venn diagram, right? Then you've given a location where the identity remains in contradiction, but then down here you have your true contradiction, right? Meaning you have the gap. So here you have the glute, and there you have the gap. And what that means, it would be like, yeah, I don't know, like Al Capone and Al Pacino went to coffee and bought an Al Cappuccino, right? It's like an absurd associative kidding. It's not like that. That's not what I was getting at. It's like, I don't know, the peekaboo game. And now you see it, now you don't. Or believing that when all the lights go out, that something, an object 15 feet from you is in fact there. When you don't have like echolocation, like a bat for it, like an inert object. Well, you can doubt it, right? So then it functions as like an imaginary form. Like you can imagine a doubt, right? Or it might be like 1/5 of my time, I imagine, is spent when my eyelids are closed. So when you close your eyes for more than a second, you start to see the after image, the after color, the opposite color within a general color wheel that is oriented in such a way as, we say it's most closely oriented to how humans see things, right? But then video game makers can change the tone of spheres and the colors and so forth, but there's still kind of an ordination to what's accepted as the appropriate color wheel. Anyway, but the whole point here, not the whole point, but I was like trying to force feed these contradictions as Venn diagrams, thinking about Venn diagrams as three-dimensional slots. Like, what happens if the Venn diagram itself gets modeled? What could we say? What could we say about the model, right? Meaning, because we're trying to index different language patterns, different things that are confusing in order to fetter out what the contradiction is, in order to index it appropriately, right? Pull it apart. And why pull it apart? Well, kind of like if you start putting an overlay, kind of like this overlay here, this plastic, and then this plastic, and this plastic, right? If you start doing an overlay of plastic colors, you have a form that goes beyond the Venn diagram that you're studying, that you're trying to analyze. And the only reason I thought that was important is because you could have different relational degrees to how it is one considers whether or not a hierarchy could function left to right or right to left, and not top to bottom or bottom to top. Never mind that. Anyway, and so then I was just trying to think of like what A is to B, B is to C, in terms of these generative grammar spaces, like people that say, oh, well, everyone's got their own point of view. And then these guys might say, no, everything's objective. And then the idea of kind of a hybrid, neutral, monistic middle ground, right, that might give different domained areas to what is being put under analysis, lingual analysis, to see whether or not it's contradictory or not. You know, like the whole, like, pain is suffering, suffering is bad, stop pain, right? So if you say, well, suffering isn't bad, then you just, oh, pain is to suffering, stop pain, right? You couldn't link it together. You couldn't do a triangle. Like, I heard Anthony Kiedis from Red Hot Chili Peppers on the phone here, and I had a dream about Anthony Kiedis here, and then I think his guitarist had a heart attack, so I felt like I was having a heart attack. I suspected I was having a heart attack in association. That's not my association, right? My association would have been this pyramid, right, or this triangle with this axis applied. And by this axis, then this axis, not only on an orthographic flat point of view, is just an X, a mere X, right? But it indicates a pyramid. Like if you flip this upside down, it indicates a three-dimensionality, such that a contradiction that appears to be in the domain is merely how one is aligned to that aspect. And that really we're looking at a dot on a edge of a pyramid instead of a dot. Like if this pyramid was upside up and that was the king's chamber in Khufu, one could walk around the pyramid and estimate where that was, even on that edge. Anyway, and so what that does is that made me realize, right, that this arrow over here, it's pointing to pyramid shapes. Why am I interested in the pyramid shapes? And why am I interested in the inversion of pyramid shapes, right? And then why am I trying to locate this central point where contradictions could occur? And so I was placing the contradiction within the bottom, and I was trying to do a three-dimensional extrusion from just the bottom, right, to be emblematic of this. Anyway, and then even the brush, see the brushes, they split. They're indicating the directionality where the presencing of the lid and the hole of the turpentine, right? This is an orthography. These are transparent. These are metaphors for what they're close to. And then this is for directionality and stellation, right? Compared to the viewer here. Anyway, but those are probably in white. Anyway, so, God, I need to get this closer. What am I thinking? Why am I the only one in here talking about it? Why am I the only one in here talking about it? Anyway, and so the contradictory point would be right there, right? But how did I do that? Oh, Oh yeah, my sensation about the Red Hot Chili Peppers that took the one pyramid and inverted it was that Red Hot Chili Peppers, I had heard of them, and then I had a burning sensation, and I was at the same time within this same domain of being in this unit, one unit. Not only did the Red Hot Chili Peppers come on often when I had a burning sensation, but I got a book called The World on Fire. So there were all these fire signs, which then neurotically developed into an anti-red thing. Anyway, but the point here is that I realized that I was really working on a dialetheistic problem and not a bounded contradiction solution. Right, and so, and the reason why this is important is for Dandelin balls, D-E-N-D-E-L balls, right? A Dandelin ball is generally found within a parabola. A parabola is like an hourglass, right? But the ball, like this ball here, if it was inside of this triangle, you could squeeze the ball up until it reached the size of, where its diameter can't be greater than the angle and the width of what it's being abutted to, right? So the Dandelin balls talk about planes that define the, that are the smallest and largest spheres that can fit within a triangle that have a plane that runs strictly between them, right? So that's not illustrated here. But I had this engineering idea that one would need to take two things that are seemingly difficult to remedy, like an overlay, right? Where you're not confusing one for the other, and inextricably extend one of them out as if it's 3D, and then leave a hole within its stem. That little hole right there would be like a drop point where the ball could fall through. And what's it falling through? Why am I divvying this up? Well, I'm divvying this up because I'm trying to figure out how these two pyramids, how to engineer these two pyramids so such that when they fall through each other backwards and start yielding more of this form, instead of a Dandelin ball pushing up the ball, it would be the pyramid, this bottom pyramid, pulling that sphere up to the smallest domain of intersection, which would be like where a grain of sand would move through an hourglass, right? So the whole idea, though, was to figure out kind of an orthography, a flat projection of this, and reapply it back to a logic, right? And so you got the Hegelian dialectic, which is thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And that, so you have your thesis, you have your antithesis, which is an exact opposite, and then the synthesis is, in fact, the pyramid structure here, right? But they're contained, right? And so here I'm thinking thesis, my version, right, is not binary bounded by necessity. Thesis, association, synthesis. And so down here, I'm like, okay, here's a thesis, here's an association with something that looks like it may mirror itself, like an antithesis, but it's open-ended, right? And how is that not like this Venn diagram here, right? Where one thing that is considered not itself has an open-endedness to it. And so that's why I'm looking for how to engineer the idea of like allowing a breach in, there's to be a breach or a cavity or a hole to move something through. But then I realized that part of this was to justify the contradictions that seem to have occurred in my mind, not only by saying, oh, certain things show up seemingly in a magic way, not like in like being in a video game where we are in a hologram or a holodeck, and different elements can be placed in there that don't seemingly follow the laws of physics as I have come to know them, right? And so there was this idea of an actual referential breach in my real universe that most people would never argue about. But then there's this underlying tonality of coincidence and like engineered synchronous engagement, like looking at the universe as a machine, and perhaps parts of the machine break and need repair. But for the most part, if it's breaking, it's just another form of the engineering, right? It's kind of an intelligent design preference of looking at everything as engineered. But then removing oneself from the equation in one case, right? Like, hey, if I start to breach or break my function within the universe, is it emblematic and is it an expression of another part of the machine, right? Echoing a dysynchronicity, right? Or is one ordained to function like a mechanary tool, a mechanistic tool, right? Like, hey, you're a tool. Anyway, but then the other point was trying to figure out how some things that are sarcastic, like I don't know, in repetition, when you hear songs and they're repeating things, if you assume that every time they're saying something, they mean a little something different, right? So if you hear somebody like, I just can't let you go, I just can't let you go, I just can't let you go, honey, or something like that, right? Like, obviously the first two, I just can't let you go's, might be just reiteration where they mean the same thing. But then other songs, the reiterations, if you think about each iteration, is necessarily approaching the topic in another way, such that, like, I just can't let you go. Like the idea of I just can't let you go because I love you. It might still be an asymmetrical relation. It might be like a kidnapping situation or a Stockholm situation. You know, like, hey, I kidnapped you and I just can't let you go, honey. Right? Or it might be like super romantic. Whew, man, my place is hot. Summertime and my fan is loud. Anyway, and so, but I was just trying to think, because there is this idea of making metaphor to not only things that are referentially inexplicable and that there is no chance to back up on a time index and test them. There's just not, right? So they're just chalked up as supernatural, super radical, out of this world, or defining me as within a type of game. And then there's the idea of, am I secure in the game? Am I being hunted? Am I the hunter? Am I secure? Am I insecure? To what degree am I liking it? Am I having a good time? Or is it an adventure? Or is it a damn chafe away struggle and tragedy where the only beauty comes from kind of the eloquence of knowing that we will suffer in this life in some manner or another, right? And have the humility to know that, instead of just always meeting like somebody that's like, hey, always look on the bright side and just focus there and just look at this nice clear part of the world and not the underbelly, right? When you're trying to raise or lower like an elevator through a shaft, right? It would be like the problem, right? It's kind of like, instead of like, if you're on a subway and you're going from one subway car to the next, you go out of your car and you enter the other car. And in some case, generally it's two doors. Some of the operations, they parallel it, right? So it appears to be just one thick door, but it's really two doors. But even that seems contradictory. Like, hey, it's one door, not two, right? But the kind of contradiction I'm talking about would be where if you could stand at the end of one car and have it shrink slightly and enter into the other car such that there was not really a door any longer, the door the door would have been in the slide, in the context slide, right? Because when you think of language, right, you think of the rules, the orthodoxy of language, and the values. Hey, we're family values, we have Christian values, we have this, we have Islamic value, we have these values that are like the outside of the rule system. In language, it would be the grammatical system, including orthography, but including how to interpret the text, why there's spaced words, like everything about a text or about interpreting inflection or repetition. Like, are you really going to do that? Are you really going to do that? You're really going to do that, right? So anyway, it's this idea that although all of those things are different and they might have semantic attributes entangled to them, right? That somehow this can be a metaphor to a three-dimensional Venn diagram, where one then at the end of the subway car, it shrinks down and it enters into the other one, and then like the bottom stays, and then that cart pulls out, right? So there wasn't so much of a door as there was a transport through an intersection that would seemingly otherwise appear physically improbable, right? So I, of course, got into thinking about contradictions when this breach happened, and then thought about it this way, right? I thought about, okay, people that say they see a physical phenomenon, not material like hard, like wood, right? Not like water, but something physical like light, right? Like, hey, look at that light, right? But it's something that's like a held form, right? A held form, a physical thing that holds form, that moves seemingly of its own accord. Like it could be a drone, but this kind of drone would be made out of light, and that light would show, it would be very drony. So I was trying to think of two things. Like in 2003, after 9/11, I took a cell phone onto the plane, and you could never make a call even in 2003 off of a plane, right? Even though all those calls on 9/11 saying, oh, we got calls, you couldn't, their technology wasn't even there to make a call then, and yet there was records, right? No one even brings up the fact that the technology wasn't there, right? And so anyway, at this date, like when this happened to me, drone technology, this happened in 2007. 2007 to 2017, that's a decade, right? That's a decade of technology. That's a decade of drone technology. What I saw in my house was emblematic of the form of a drone, but was really more like light. It was a physics, right? And I thought, how could one speak about interdimensionality that has an aspect such as light that radiates so that I could see it, and yet move through our material, move its molecular structure seemingly beyond anything I've ever comprehended in physics, right through a wall? How could it pause? How could it form itself, show up, pause, and then move through a wall? And I was thinking about this idea of, what you call it? Guess this might be like a draft science video. What's I thinking about? Oh, don't get me derailed now. Don't derail me. Where's my coffee? Yeah, let me try to recenter. Oh. So like this, like, okay. So if there was, what do you call it? Like, okay, so you got ions, like ionic bonds and covalent bonds, right, molecularly. And I thought, what happens if in the future, like what happens if what I saw was something indicative of a greater intelligence or a future intelligence that had come back in time? Who knows, right? All I know is very interdimensional, kind of like Guardians of the Galaxies have devices to see interdimensionality or different time dimensions on the same space, that type of thing. Anyway, so I thought, what happens if an object has the technology to release all of its ionic bonds and maintain all of its covalent bonds, and then do the inverse, release its covalent bonds and only hold its form together through ionic bonding as it's negotiating its way molecularly through a universe that has both ionic and covalent bondings, right? Such that there was like this speculation of what it would mean on a physics level to unbound in certain cases, like unbounded, like I talked about earlier with the math, right? Unbounded units of measurement and bounded, right? So anyway, I'll put a link to a math video on this. I think it's interesting, not on this whole thing, but and this is a 19 minutes, but it's boundedness of subsets. It's open balls and closed balls. And the reason I bring up the balls once again is it's important as like a laser pointer is important, right? A laser pointer, you can point at something very specific, but the laser point itself is still, right? It's an extrusion of the light. The point of its intersection still has a diameter to it, right? And you can move it around still pointing at the same thing. You know, you can move around the periphery or you can be the center, right? But the point though is whatever that measure of that diameter would be, like the orthographic projection of a sphere or a ball or a domain. A domain in philosophy would be a domain where contradictions seem to be bounded, right? They do seem to be bounded. And they might be bounded when a Dandelin ball is getting so small, whether it's being pulled from the top or pushed from the bottom, it might become so infinitely small that it might move, like this ball might like turning an X, a perfectly good X, a letter X, perfectly good letter X, into an hourglass, right? Like necessarily running a vertical shaft that connects the two. But that's why I was bringing up the subway, right? One is kind of a movement. That's why I bring up the physics, is kind of like to sidestep the necessity of absolutism in logic and look for like an engineering or a mirroring, right? Like substance dualism. I'm both a body and a soul at the same time, right? That is the idea of an embodied but separate soul, right? It's peculiar, the maintenances that we have and how they might translate into thoughts, concepts, ideas. Oh, and so yeah, and the whole idea is, I thought, boy, wouldn't it be great to make a Venn diagram that allowed temporarily like angular contradictions, like axis-oriented contradictions, and it allowed like a laser that burns holes through things. Like it's not just a pointer, now it's a burner. It's going to go right through the thing. It'll define the axis as an absence, such that a perfectly good X could turn into an hourglass, and that we could make an architecture out of such a thing. Of course, be on a windless planet, I suppose. And all of that, oh yeah, all of that, and all of this on a spirit level for me is trying to figure out still, right, how to turn a perfectly good pentagram, a 5-pointed star, into a perfectly good Star of David, like a 6-sided star, right? Like how to take a 5-sided star and appropriate it to a 6-sided star through a pyramid, through some sort of angle of adjustment, a 6-sided star, and then the angle of orthography, and then find out if there's any convexity to a form as it's rotating. Like instead of a 3-sided triangle on a sphere now that was once flat, but now it's rotated, a pentagram or a Star of David, 6-sided star, and then rotate it in such a manner that it itself, roughly being the same size as the other star, could still like slide through the other star, you know, look like a mirror of it, such that you have something that looks like its shadow or its projection flatly matches the conceptual 3-dimensionality of a thing. It's like if I did my hands and I made your mom's profile in my shadow or something, right? You might be convinced just by seeing the shadow that perhaps it was your mom standing in another room where the projection was being created, right? And so, and then it would be the idea of then putting, like moving your mom in over here and trying to attribute her to the shadow that was really made by my hands, right? By mere association, not an antithesis, right? That was my difference here, right? Between thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. It would be thesis, association, and synthesis, right? Where one would be a projective overlay, right? One then is defined verbally, triangularly, in some sort of justificatory manner, but really it would be more like putting the mom, how to do this. It'd be like putting the mom standing up right here. Yeah. I'll just paint it. Right. Okay. So here's. I think I explained it well, but okay, that would be like your mom, and then here would be like my hands, and then this projection would yield an image of my hands that look just like a projection, a non-projection, right? A false projection of the mom in that domain, right? So that's kind of the base metaphor for what would appear to be a mere associative and hence not federoutable type of contradiction. It would be an always not knowing whether or not what you just saw was merely a projection or was not. And maybe the lights could flicker and the shadow would still remain the same down on the end, and that it would be both a projection of the mother and of the hand's shadow at the same time, right? And then what do you do with a shadow, right? A double shadow, right? And so that's the idea. What happens if this shadow here, right, is a different color, just slightly, than this one? What happens if there's something about that type of identity that appears to be its negation? Like when you close your eyes, you have a negation, right? So then what you use color as a metaphor for a type of recompositing that appears to be speaking still about said form. I don't know. It's all just trying to speak out loud about things that most people, I think, might already intuit, but like trying to give it some articulation. Okay, well, who knows how this video is going to be received? Take that, all you crazies. Okay, well, bye, 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 bye.